Chapter 1 Vanished in the Devil's Triangle. The sea, that night, was blacker than oil, stretching endlessly beneath a starless sky. The moon was a thin silver hook, barely enough to illuminate the restless waves. Somewhere far off, a storm groaned like a living thing, its low rumble threading through the wind. Off the coast of Bermuda, the waters hid stories. Hundreds of ships, dozens of planes, and untold numbers of souls swallowed without warning. Fishermen spoke of ghostly lights that shimmered just below the surface, luring vessels into unseen currents. Pilots told of instruments spinning into chaos, compasses pointing in impossible directions. Some survivors, the few who returned, whispered of a silence so absolute it pressed on their chests like a hand. On the night of June 14, 1977, the cargo freighter SS Valiant Dawn steamed east through those same waters, its hull slicing through the warm Atlantic. She carried 18 crewmen and 4,000 tons of raw sugar bound for Lisbon. At her helm stood Captain Elias Thorne, a veteran of 20 years at sea. The man was as hard as the steel beneath his boots, but tonight his gaze lingered on the horizon more than usual. A low voice crackled from the radio room. "Captain, we are picking up something strange on the shortwave. Faint, almost like Morse code, but slower." Thorne frowned. "Could be interference. The air's been thick all day." "It is not interference, sir," the radio man replied. "It is repeating, over and over." Down in the galley, the men tried to ignore the subtle change in the air. Conversation faltered. The engine's steady hum seemed to dull, replaced by a rhythm like breathing. Even the sea spray that usually stung the deckhands' cheeks felt warm, almost feverish. By midnight, the radio signal had grown louder, a string of dots and dashes that, when translated, formed a chilling message. "Help us. They are here." Then, without warning, all contact with the SS Valiant Dawn ceased. No distress signal, no debris, no trace. For decades, it became another name in the Bermuda Triangle's growing list of mysteries. Families mourned without closure. Maritime records chalked it up to unknown causes. And yet, the whispers persisted of a freighter that still drifted somewhere out there, caught in the triangle's invisible grip. In 2023, 46 years later, a deep-sea recovery crew aboard the Mariner's Resolve was dispatched after a shortwave signal, almost identical to the one from 1977, was picked up off the Florida coast. The coordinates matched the last known position of the Valiant Dawn, the captain of the Mariner's Resolve. Claire Sutton stood on deck as the wind pulled at her jacket. She had read the old reports poured over every page of the vanished freighter's log. Her crew was small but seasoned. Mark, the sonar technician, Lila, the marine biologist, and Jonas, the diver, whose hands had scars from every wreck he had ever explored. "We will check the site, log the position, and see if there is anything worth salvaging," she told them. "We are not here to prove ghost stories." But as the sun dipped and the waters around them grew unnervingly still, Mark's sonar screen lit up with an impossible shape. A large vessel resting upright on the ocean floor. "Perfectly intact. That cannot be," Mark whispered. "If it has been down there for nearly 50 years, it should be stripped bare. But this looks new." The first dive was scheduled for dawn. That night, as the crew prepared equipment, the same faint Morse code began to hum through their radio. The same plea from 1977. Leela leaned closer to the speaker, her face pale. "It is not a recording. Someone is sending this right now." From the dark horizon, a single light blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it vanished. Claire's stomach knotted. She knew what she should do. Turn the ship, radio the Coast Guard, and leave. But something in the stillness held her. Something in that unblinking stretch of sea felt expectant. The ocean was waiting. And in the black water below, the valiant Dawn waited too. Chapter 2. Descend into the abyss. The morning came, but the sun seemed reluctant to rise. A heavy haze clung to the horizon, muting the light into a dull, metallic gray. The mariner's resolve floated motionless above the coordinates. Her engines idling. The crew gathered on deck as Jonas secured his dive harness. Claire stood beside him, the wind tugging at her hair. "Remember, in and out. No deeper than 200 feet. You find the wreck, mark it, and come back. We do not play hero down there." Jonas nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the water. It was too calm. The Atlantic never rested like this. "Aye, Captain. Just a look, nothing more." The winch groaned, lowering him slowly into the water. The moment he disappeared beneath the surface, Lila's voice came over the deck intercom. "Depth reading stable. Visibility should be good. He's on the descent." Below, Jonas drifted through an alien world. Shafts of light stabbed through the green-blue depths, catching particles of plankton that swirled like dust in an abandoned room. The deeper he went, the colder it became. His dive computer beeped softly as he passed 100 feet, and then it appeared. The valiant Dawn loomed out of the darkness, her hull unscarred, her paint unchipped, as if she had sailed yesterday. Her name was still etched in gold across the bow. Jonas' breath caught. This is impossible," he whispered into his comms. "Describe." Mark's voice crackled back. "She's whole. perfect, not a barnacle on her. I see lights in the portholes. Jonas stopped mid-sentence. One of the windows flickered, a faint, warm glow, like a lantern swaying in the dark. Leela's voice cut in, uneasy. Jonas, that is not possible. The power would have died decades ago. He swam closer. The glass in the portholes was fogged from the inside. Shapes moved behind it. Do you see that? He asked, his voice trembling. Static hissed in his earpiece. Then, faintly, help us, please. Jonas froze. The voice wasn't coming from the comms channel. It was inside his helmet. His breathing quickened. I think they're alive, he said, though he knew how absurd it sounded. A shadow passed over him. Slowly, he turned. Something vast was moving just above the wreck. Not a fish. Not a whale. Bigger. Its outline blurred, like heat distortion in water. But it radiated a low hum he could feel in his bones. On the deck of the Mariner's Resolve, Mark's sonar went wild. The unknown object appeared and vanished between sweeps, always closer than the last ping. Jonas, you need to surface now, Claire ordered, her voice sharp. But Jonas didn't respond. His video feed showed the freighter's cargo doors slowly opening, as if inviting him in. Inside, only blackness. The hum deepened. The light from the portholes grew brighter. And then Jonas' camera jerked violently. A blur of motion, a muffled shout, and static. Jonas, report. Claire barked. Nothing. The water around the ship began to churn. Slow at first, then violently, as if some unseen whirlpool had awakened beneath them. Claire gripped the rail, her knuckles white. Pull him up, now. The winch screamed as the line came back. But when the harness broke the surface, it was empty. Only Jonas' helmet remained, the visor fogged from the inside. From somewhere deep below, the faint tapping of Morse code rose through the water. Chapter 3. The Signal. The deck of the Mariner's Resolve was no longer the bustling hive it had been that morning. Silence had settled over the crew like a damp shroud. No one spoke, not even Mark, who usually filled tense moments with nervous chatter. The only sound was the ocean's strange, rhythmic lapping, too uniform, too deliberate, as if it were keeping time to something none of them could hear. Claire crouched beside the recovered helmet. A film of condensation clung to the inside of the visor, beads of water running down in crooked trails. It almost looked as though someone inside had been breathing heavily. But Jonas was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere in the churning water they had pulled him from. Leela approached with the handheld sonar still in her grip, its display glitching with lines and bursts of static. I don't know what to tell you, Captain, she said softly. 1 minute his signal was normal. The next, It was like the ocean itself swallowed it. Claire's jaw tightened. She didn't like mysteries, and she liked losing crew even less. He didn't just vanish. People don't just vanish underwater. Mark's eyes darted to the sonar screen on the console. Captain, you might want to see this. A single dot pulsed on the display. Jonas transponder tag. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, directly into the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. That's impossible, Leela whispered. He's not wearing the tag anymore. As they watched, a faint clicking began to bleed through the ship's comms system. It was irregular at first, but then it took on a pattern. Claire's eyes widened. Morse code, she said. Leela grabbed a notepad and began scribbling furiously. Click. 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 Long pause. Then again. After a minute, she looked up, her face pale. It says, "Below the light," over and over. Mark swallowed hard. Below the light. What light? No one answered. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of something metallic and burnt, like scorched wires. Claire scanned the horizon. In the distance, the haze had thickened into a dense, swirling wall of fog. It rolled toward them with unnatural speed, swallowing the sea and sky in its path. Engines full ahead, Claire barked. But as the crew scrambled, the ship's lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. The mariner's resolve was plunged into darkness. From the fog came a faint glow, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. It hung low above the water, too bright to be a fishing vessel, too steady to be lightning. It was the only thing in the void, and Jonas' transponder signal was moving straight toward it. Mark's voice trembled. "Captain, if that's the light, then below the light means..." Before he could finish, the deck shuddered violently. Something massive scraped against the hull. Slow, deliberate, like fingers trailing along a coffin lid. The sound was deep enough to rattle teeth, and then came a low hum. The same one Jonas had described before his signal cut out. Claire steadied herself against the railing. "Get us out of here." But the wheel refused to turn. The compass spun uselessly in its housing. Every instrument readout on the bridge was blank. The fog swallowed the last of the horizon. The strange light grew brighter, reflecting off the water in shimmering bands. And then something moved beneath it. It was impossible to see clearly through the shifting mist, but its outline was immense, a shape that suggested both machine and creature, as though some vast, ancient thing had been waiting here all along. From somewhere deep in the hull, the tapping began again. Louder this time, closer. Leela's face drained of color. "Captain, It's coming from inside the ship. And then the first scream tore through the dark. Chapter 4. The fog that breathed the scream jolted the crew into motion, but not in the orderly, disciplined way of sailors in a storm. This was panic, raw and unrestrained. Boots thudded against the deck as men and women ran toward the sound. But the darkness was near total, broken only by the eerie glow spilling from the fog outside. Claire was first into the passageway, her flashlight beam slicing through the black. The sound had come from the lower storage compartment, the one closest to the hull, where they felt that slow, deliberate scrape. "Stay together," she ordered, but the words seemed to evaporate into the thick, stagnant air. They reached the metal door. Tea was half ajar. Mark stepped forward to push it open and froze. The hinges were warm. Claire brushed past him, shining the light inside. The beam caught on something smeared along the wall. Streaks of water, dark and shimmering. It wasn't blood. It wasn't oil. It was thicker, like seaweed ground into paste. And the compartment was empty. Empty except for the smell. It was the same burnt metal scent from before, stronger now, coating the back of their throats. Then, from the darkness beyond the beam, came the sound of breathing. Not human breathing. It was slow, measured, and deep enough to make the floor vibrate. Lila raised her flashlight and swept it toward the noise. But the beam seemed to falter, as though the darkness itself was swallowing the light. "Back up," Claire whispered. Now, they retreated toward the ladder, moving as quietly as possible. But the breathing followed, not from behind them, but from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. As though the ship itself had lungs. A sudden metallic clang rang out above them. The sound echoed down the ladder shaft, and a wet thump followed it. Claire climbed first, weapon drawn, her heart hammering. She emerged onto the main deck and froze. The fog was no longer just around the ship. It was on the ship. Thick tendrils of it slithered over the railings, curling across the planks, coiling around ankles before dissipating into thin air. Mark stumbled up behind her and pointed to the bow. "Captain, there was someone standing there." At first, she thought it was Jonas. The figure was wearing his wetsuit, his dive mask pushed up onto his forehead. But his posture was wrong, too rigid, too still. She took a cautious step forward. Jonas, the figure, turned. It wasn't him. His face, if it could be called that, was pale and translucent, as though it were made of the same fog that surrounded them. The features shifted slightly with every movement, like clouds forming and breaking apart. And then it smiled. The sound that came from its mouth was not laughter. It was that low, vibrating hum they had heard before. the one that rattled the bones. The fog surged forward. Claire drew her flare gun and fired. The brilliant red light hissed through the mist, but instead of dispersing it, the fog swallowed the flare whole, snuffing it out instantly. From the shadows of the deck, another shape emerged, and another. Each one wore the outline of a crew member, but none of them were truly human anymore. Mark whispered, "We need to get below. Seal the hatches." He didn't finish. One of the shapes lunged, moving far faster than anything that size should move. Its hands, if they were hands, closed around him, and the fog poured from its arms into his mouth and nose. Mark's body went rigid, eyes wide and glassy. Then he went still. The shape holding him stepped back, and now there were two Marks, both wearing the same expressionless face. Leela screamed. The sound seemed to excite them. Shapes began climbing over the sides of the ship now, pulling themselves aboard in unnatural silence. Claire didn't waste another second. Inside now. She shouted, firing another flare blindly into the mist. They bolted for the hatch. Leela slammed it shut behind them and spun the wheel until it locked tight. The fog pressed against the small circular window as though testing the seal. Claire turned to the remaining crew. Fewer than half were left now. She didn't have to tell them the truth. They could all see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. This was survival. Chapter 5. The storm that wouldn't move. The ship groaned as if under some immense, invisible weight. The air inside the sealed cabin was thick and humid, every breath tasting faintly of rust and salt. Claire paced, trying to think, trying not to imagine Mark's blank face staring back at her in the fog. "Engines dead," Lila said from the control panel, her voice shaking. "Batteries draining too fast. It's like something's pulling power from everything." Jonas spoke up for the first time since he'd been found, his voice low and flat. "It wants us to stay." They all turned. His eyes glistened unnaturally in the dim emergency lighting like whetstones. "What wants us to stay?" Claire demanded. Jonas tilted his head in an unsettling, almost curious way. The water, the sky, the fog, all one thing. It remembers. It doesn't forget. Before anyone could respond, a heavy knock echoed from the hatch. Once, twice, then faster, a pounding that rattled the metal frame. The wheel began to turn on its own. Claire lunged forward, grabbing it with both hands. It felt warm, no, hot, beneath her palms, as though something was heating it from the other side. She braced her foot against the wall and forced it back into place. The pounding stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the whisper. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the walls, inside the ceiling, inside their skulls. Words in no language they recognized, but carrying a meaning they could all feel. Open the door. The lights flickered. One by one, they went out. The only illumination came from the narrow porthole, and that's when they saw them. Dozens of faces pressed against the glass, each one flickering between the features of someone they knew and someone they had never seen. The pounding started again, louder, more urgent. The crew armed themselves with whatever they could find: flare guns, crowbars, a harpoon from the storage rack. The noise rose to a deafening pitch, the entire ship trembling beneath their feet. On my mark, Claire shouted over the chaos. We're making a run for the lifeboats. They kicked open the hatch and charged onto the deck, into the storm that had been there a second ago. Waves rose like walls, slamming into the ship. The fog swirled violently, forming spirals that reached down like grasping hands. And through it all, the shapes moved. Dozens of them, advancing from every direction. The crew fought like cornered animals. Flares sizzled through the mist. Crowbars struck bodies that dissolved and reformed instantly. Jonas, or what was left of him, moved among the fog shapes, guiding them toward his former shipmates. A wave struck the starboard side, throwing two sailors overboard. They didn't resurface. Claire grabbed Leela's arm, dragging her toward the lifeboats. Go, now. But when they reached the David, they saw the ropes had been cut. The lifeboats were gone, and the shapes were closing in. Chapter 6. The Triangle's Hunger. The deck tilted sharply as another massive wave slammed into the hull. Claire and Lila clung to the railing, salt spray blinding their eyes. The shapes moved faster now, their fog bodies flowing over the wood like spilled ink. Some had faces, crew members who'd vanished hours ago, days ago, maybe years ago. Others were blank, featureless masks that seemed to watch without eyes. Leela screamed as one lunged for her. Claire swung the harpoon with every ounce of strength she had, the metal shaft slicing through the figure. It exploded into vapor, but seconds later, the mist reformed behind her. There's no fighting them, Leela cried. She was right. The shapes weren't attacking to kill. They were hurting, driving them toward the bow where the fog was thickest, swirling in a perfect spiral over the water. The spiral widened, revealing something beneath the surface. It wasn't a whirlpool. It was an eye. Miles wide, the black pupil stared straight up at them, its iris shifting with the colors of the storm. The sea itself seemed to lean upward, a living thing. The ship's timbers cracked, splitting under some immense pressure from below. One by one, the shapes began stepping off the deck, walking straight down into the water, merging with the pupil until they vanished. Jonas stood at the railing, smiling faintly. "It's been waiting," he said. Then he stepped over and was gone. The deck buckled. Claire and Lila were thrown to their knees. The fog wrapped around their arms and legs, pulling them toward the edge. Lila clung to the railing, screaming Claire's name, but the mist tightened around her throat and yanked her away. Claire reached out, and the fog pulled her too. The last thing she saw was the sky folding inward, as if the world itself were closing its eye. The water swallowed them whole. The storm vanished. The ship, once battered by waves and fog, now sat motionless in a calm, empty sea. No bodies, no damage, just silence. Somewhere deep below, the triangle had eaten and was waiting for its next meal.